Welcome to Cryptid Conversations, your late-night refuge where we discuss the things that lurk in the shadows, the stories everyone else is afraid to tell, and the truth our government tries to conceal. I'm your host, Sir Maverick Maxwell, and tonight we have an encounter that will send chills down your spine. Before we get started, if you like short horror stories with fictional cryptids, don't forget to subscribe to Cryptid Conversations, Original Tales of Terror, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Joining us tonight is Hoki, a logger who has decided to come forward and share his terrifying experience with something so vile, so wretched, and so wicked, even the darkness cowers from its disturbing presence. Tonight you will encounter case number 0001, the Midnight Menace.
First, I want to thank you for allowing me to share my story tonight. It really means a lot to me. I debated for a couple of days if I really wanted to go through with this because I didn't think anyone would believe me. I live in a remote area located on the eastern edge of the Espoirs National Forest, 25 minutes from a log processing plant and about an hour from the nearest city. I had decided to, as they call it, live off the grid after I lost my wife to cancer a few months prior. What I'm about to tell you started a little over a week ago. After a long day of work, I usually sit on my front porch and think about how much my wife and I used to talk about the outdoors. I did this for a couple of hours until it was a little after sunset. When the sun finally did set, I walked out into the front of my cabin and looked up towards the sky for the brightest star that I could find. I'd recognize this star as my wife, and I'd tell her a little about my day, and then I'd wish her a good night before going inside. On this one particular evening, everything went like usual. I waited until sunset and walked into my front yard and looked for the brightest star. The one I spotted was brighter than any other in the sky at that moment. In fact, it was the brightest one I'd seen since I began doing this. I told my wife what I did today, remarking how stunning she looked tonight. Then I said goodbye. I was about to turn away, but paused because it looked like the star was getting brighter. I thought my eyes were playing a trick at first. I was a bit tired, but it turns out they weren't. Not only was it getting brighter, it was moving in my direction. Before I could even make sense of what I was seeing, the star shot across the sky right overhead, travelling towards an area of the forest and disappearing out of sight over the canopy. That was the first time I'd seen a shooting star that close. I didn't think it hit anything, as I didn't hear any impact. But I did take it as a sign my wife had been listening to me. It brought the biggest smile to my face. After a few captivated moments, I decided to finally go inside and get some rest. Later on that night, I had a little trouble falling asleep for some reason, but I eventually made myself drift off. As I slept, a thumping sound made me come to. I opened my eyes and was greeted by the beams of a full moon dashing through my second-story window, its rays only subdued by the deep and dark crevices of my bedroom's interior. I looked at my alarm clock and saw the red glare from its display. It was a little after 12, maybe around 12:05 at that moment, and this thumping sound kept going. I started to wonder where it was coming from. It sounded like someone was bumping against a wall. This lasted for about 10 seconds, and then it just stopped. I waited for a few moments and didn't hear anything else. At least nothing out of the ordinary. After about another minute or so, I decided to lie back down and go to sleep because I had to get up fairly early. When I shut my eyes, 5 seconds had passed before I heard another sound. This time, a scraping noise caught my attention. It was low, but still distinct enough for me to notice it while awake, though if I had went back to sleep, I may not have heard it. My first thought was mice, which led me to initially ignore it, but for some reason I felt I needed to make sure. As I sat on the edge of my bed, I listened to the sound closely and realized it was not coming from within my bedroom, it was coming from below. I walked out into the dim hallway that led towards the downstairs. There's a light switch along the way for the lower area, so I flipped the switch, and as soon as the light came on, the scraping noise stopped. I heard something fall over on my front porch. I was a bit puzzled, but my first thought was a raccoon, and so I grabbed a broom and walked towards the door, listening for a few moments and then opening it. I saw one of my potted plants had been overturned, creating a mess all over my front porch. This certainly looked like the work of a raccoon, and perhaps even more than one. I looked beyond my front porch into the dark landscape and briefly scanned the area. And even though I didn't see any, I still had a few choice words for them. "Stay off my dang front porch, you little forest bandits!" Since it was late, I decided to wait until tomorrow to clean up the mess. I went ahead and left the lights on for the rest of the night to keep the raccoons at bay. The next morning, after I cleaned up my front porch and did some work, I decided to go fishing by a lake, not too far from my cabin. It was my favorite activity to start off the weekend. I waited until late evening when the fish were active, and then I followed the trail toward the lake with my fishing rod and flashlight by my side. I wasn't having much luck with any fish, and the evening quickly turned into early night with not one single catch. I did find it rather odd, as I usually would have caught at least one of them by now. I began scanning the area and saw a rather large, dark, round shadow further down within the lake. It was a little hard to make out from where I was due to it being night, but I stopped and went to take a closer look, allowing my flashlight to guide my way. This was when I stumbled upon a huge pile of fish just sitting on the lakefront. I brought my flashlight closer and saw all of the fish's eyes were missing. I didn't know what to make of it, and I certainly didn't know of any animal that would do this. I glanced around with my flashlight and spotted what appeared to be animal tracks embedded in the mud. However, these were tracks unlike any animal I've ever seen before. They were quite large, but the biggest animal out here that could leave tracks similar to this was a bear. But these were bigger than any bear tracks I've seen. They looked like some kind of large lizard or something, but I wasn't sure. I discovered the strange tracks formed a path, and I cautiously followed them until they led me to the edge of the lake, where I saw... Well, I actually don't know what it is I saw, but it was shaped like a round ship or pod. This was the large, circular shadow I saw earlier. From what I could make out, the thing looked badly damaged, almost like it had crashed. That's when I remembered the shooting star from the other night. Could that have actually been... It was then I knew that I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the entire night went silent. A hovering sense of dread hung directly over my head, and I could feel the eyes of something staring at me. Something intending to bring me great harm. Every sense, every urge, and every inner voice told me to get the hell out of there immediately, because if I didn't, whatever was out there was... What the hell is that? I witnessed the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen in all 62 years of my life, right in front of me, only several yards away. staring me down with flaring red eyes that burned through the darkness like embers of hatred. It stood upright and was as big as a full-grown grizzly bear, and its arms dangled below its knees like they were broken. But each of its fingers had claws shaped like large meat hooks, and it sounded pissed. It instantly bolted towards me like a mindless beast with no sense of reason, but with every intention for bloodlust. I immediately ran for my life and started screaming at the top of my lungs, and the only reply I received were the echoes of my solitude. Even though this thing was huge, it moved fast and was catching up to me quickly. I started to run out of breath at the worst time and didn't know if I could last any longer. Then I saw my cabin up ahead. I kept running until I made it inside and shut the door before I locked it. I ran into another room where I had my hunting rifle. When I came back into the main room, a heavy slam landed on my front porch, and then I heard a deep growl. It was here. A scraping sound, followed by a thumping noise against my cabin door, caught my attention, and I immediately recognized it as the same sounds I heard the night before. It must have been trying to find a way to get inside the other night while I was sleeping. I raised my rifle towards the door. "Get the hell away from my cabin now, or I'll shoot!" The noises stopped, and I heard the beast's heavy footsteps drag away from the front porch. It seemed like it understood what I said and decided to leave at that point. There was a dead silence for a few moments, but it felt like an eternity as I stood there, catching my breath and waiting for the slightest sound. When I didn't hear anything, my mind told me that it was finally gone. But my instincts didn't align with my thoughts, and for some reason I still believed it was nearby. Then I heard a tapping noise. At first, I thought it was coming from my front porch until I realized it sounded like glass. The sound wasn't coming from outside the cabin door. It was coming from my right side, from the window. I took a deep breath and slowly turned towards my right. And I saw the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. It was hunched over, watching me through the cabin window. It had shaggy hair all over its body and psychotic bulging eyes that burned right through my soul. It stood completely motionless, with one of its hooked claws pressed against the glass window. I noticed that its claws were shorter than when I first saw it, making me believe it could retract them. At this point, I was frozen in fear. I couldn't even hold my rifle steady, and that bastard looked me right in my eyes and slowly started to open its mouth. It showed me each row of razor-sharp teeth that lined its wide grin, still managing to growl deeply. It could see my fear and savoured my disorientation. It began to tap on the glass as if it was taunting me. By now, I had let my fear overtake me and fired my rifle at the window, hitting the deranged beast in its right eye. It let out a hellish scream before lifting itself out of my view. I could hear its distorted cries fade into the night the longer I listened. For the rest of the night, I stayed in that one spot, refusing to move an inch. And I waited until the first sign of sunrise before I decided to leave. I told everyone I knew at the lumber mill what I had seen. Many took it as a joke, while a few others were more concerned about my mental health. I was willing to show them where I found the strange ship as long as I had several other people, all armed, accompanying me. No one believed me, and they suggested I take a few days off work. I made up my mind thereafter to move back to the city, and I promised myself I would never go into the forest there ever again. People may think I'm just some old man who lost his mind, but I know what I saw. I don't know what kind of animal it was or where it came from, but I don't think I killed it that night. I think it's still out there, and whoever is unfortunate enough to encounter it, I pray God has mercy on their souls.
What an absolutely horrific experience you underwent, and you have my utmost respect for having the courage to share such a disturbing encounter. Remember, while some outsiders may be skeptical of your story on Cryptid Conversations, we listen and understand your trauma. We accept you as you are, and many of our listeners feel the same as we do. I want to let you know that a research team is being organized to do a follow-up in the area, due to this encounter being filed as an open, level 10, and possibly cosmi-humanoid cryptid. We will be taking all the necessary precautions during our investigation. I want to thank you once again for speaking with us tonight, Hoki.
Thank you for having me, Sir Maxwell.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, cryptid huntresses and cryptid hunters, believers, and even our moody skeptics, I want to thank you for tuning into tonight's episode. On our next episode, I will be giving you a first-hand account from one of our files, which deals with a particularly dangerous cryptid said to roam the waterways near Cali, Colombia. 4 friends went on vacation, but only one of them came back home. With that said, I'm your host, Sir Maverick Maxwell, and you've just encountered Cryptid Conversations, Original Tales of Terror. Don't forget to like and subscribe and visit our Cryptid Conversations, Original Tales of Terror Facebook fan page and Facebook groups page for more information.